Clara Barton was a Massachusetts school teacher and a compassionate humanitarian who became the angel of the battlefield. Clara Barton, the founder of the American Red Cross, was born in North Oxford, Massachusetts on December 25, 1821, Christmas Day. She came from a middle-class family. She had a very determined spirit. Barton's childhood was marked by shyness and sensitivity. She was educated in local schools and showed an early aptitude for learning. Then in 1833, when Clara was just 11 years old, her brother David fell from the roof of a barn and the young girl became his primary caregiver for 2 years. Clara Barton discovered her calling in helping others, that she had a natural gift for nursing and caregiving. In 1839, at the age of 17, Barton began teaching school. She was one of the few women in her community to pursue a professional career. She taught for over a decade and became known for her ability to handle even the most difficult students. In 1850, Barton left teaching temporarily to further her own education. She attended the Liberal Institute in Clinton, New York, seeking to expand her knowledge and capabilities. She was a voracious learner who believed education was the key to independence. Clara Barton was a pioneering educator who established one of the first free public schools in New Jersey. In 1852, she founded a school in Bordentown that grew from 6 students to over 600 within a year. But when the school board hired a man to lead the institution she had built, Barton was devastated by that. In 1854, Barton left New Jersey and moved to Washington, D.C. She became one of the first women to work as a clerk in the U.S. Patent Office, earning the same salary as her male colleagues. Barton faced discrimination and harassment from men who resented her presence in the workplace. America in the 1850s was not ready for independent professional women who demanded equal treatment and equal pay for equal work. Clara Barton was not a Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Lucy Stone, any of the fervent suffragists, if you will, who were leading the women's movement. She was a more quiet advocate for women's rights through her actions rather than her words. In April 1861, when the Civil War began, Barton was working in Washington, D.C. She witnessed the arrival of wounded soldiers from the 6th Massachusetts Regiment who had been attacked by a mob in Baltimore. These men had no supplies, no bandages, no food. Clara Barton immediately organized a relief effort. She advertised in newspapers asking for donations and supplies. The response was overwhelming. Barton collected medical supplies, food and clothing in her own apartment, turning it into a makeshift warehouse. But Barton wanted to do more than collect supplies. She wanted to bring them directly to the soldiers on the battlefield. This was an unprecedented idea. Women were not allowed on the front lines. They were expected to remain safely behind in hospitals and aid stations. Clara Barton was determined to break through these barriers. In July 1862, Barton received permission from the Surgeon General to travel to the front line. She was 40 years old and embarking on the most dangerous work of her life. Barton loaded wagons with supplies and headed to the battlefields of Virginia. She arrived at the Battle of Cedar Mountain in August 1862. The scene was horrific. Thousands of wounded men lay on the ground with no medical care, no water, no food. The Army Medical Corps was overwhelmed and undersupplied. Clara Barton worked through the night distributing supplies, binding wounds and comforting dying soldiers. She held their hands, wrote letters to their families and prayed with them as they took their last breaths. Barton was fearless under fire. Bullets whizzed past her head, shells exploded around her, but she never flinched, never retreated. At the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, Barton arrived as the fighting raged. It was the bloodiest single day in American history, with over 23,000 casualties. Clara Barton moved among the wounded men on the battlefield itself. She brought water and food. She bandaged wounds and assisted surgeons performing amputations. A bullet tore through her sleeve and killed the soldier she was tending. The soldiers began calling her the angel of the battlefield, that she appeared when they needed her most, like a guardian angel sent from heaven. Clara Barton worked at some of the war's most terrible battles: Antietam, Fredericksburg, Charleston. She was always there with supplies and comfort, always risking her own life to save others. But Barton faced resistance from military authorities and male nurses who resented her presence. Some doctors refused to work with her. Some officers tried to send her away from the front lines. Clara Barton persisted through sheer force of will. She had powerful allies in Washington who supported her work. She had the gratitude of thousands of soldiers who owed their lives to her care. In 1864, Barton was appointed by General Benjamin Butler to be the superintendent of nurses for the Army of the James. It was an official recognition of the work she had been doing for years, but the appointment came with new challenges and responsibilities. Barton had to manage other nurses, coordinate with military medical staff, and navigate the complex bureaucracy of the Army. She proved to be an effective administrator as well as a compassionate caregiver. When the war ended in April 1865, Clara Barton faced a new challenge. Thousands of soldiers were missing. Their families had no idea if they were alive or dead, prisoners of war or buried in unmarked graves. Barton established the Office of Missing Soldiers in her rooms in Washington, D.C. She received over 63,000 letters from desperate families searching for their loved ones. Clara Barton and her assistants were able to identify and mark the graves of over 13,000 men who had died at the notorious Andersonville prison camp. It was painstaking, heartbreaking work, but Barton was determined that every soldier should be accounted for, that every family should have answers. By 1868, Barton had closed the Office of Missing Soldiers. She had answered nearly all the letters and provided information on over 22,000 missing men, but the years of war work had taken their toll on Clara Barton's health. She was exhausted both physically and emotionally. She suffered from what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. In 1869, Barton's doctors advised her to travel to Europe for rest and recuperation. She sailed for England and then traveled to Switzerland seeking peace and recovery, but Clara Barton could not stay away from humanitarian work for long. While in Switzerland, she learned about the International Red Cross, an organization founded in Geneva in 1863. The Red Cross was dedicated to providing neutral humanitarian care to wounded soldiers in wartime. It was based on the Geneva Convention, an international treaty that protected medical personnel and wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Clara Barton was amazed to discover this organization. She had been doing Red Cross work during the Civil War without even knowing the Red Cross existed. The United States had not signed the Geneva Convention and was not part of the International Red Cross movement. Barton met with Red Cross officials in Switzerland and learned about their methods and principles. She was inspired by their vision of organized international humanitarian relief. In 1870, when the Franco-Prussian War broke out, Barton volunteered to work with the Red Cross. She traveled to the front lines in France and Germany, distributing supplies and organizing relief efforts. Barton worked in Strasbourg and Paris. She established workrooms where women could earn money sewing and doing other work while their cities were under siege. She provided food and clothing to civilians displaced by the war. Clara Barton saw firsthand how the Red Cross operated on a large scale with international support and recognition. She was determined to bring the Red Cross to America. When Barton returned to the United States in 1873, she began campaigning for American participation in the Red Cross movement. She wrote letters to politicians and government officials. She gave lectures and published articles explaining the importance of the Geneva Convention, but America was weary of war. The Civil War was still a fresh and painful memory. Many Americans wanted nothing to do with European organizations or international treaties. Clara Barton faced years of frustration and rejection. She suffered a nervous breakdown in 1876 and had to suspend her campaign for several years, but Barton never gave up on her vision. She resumed her advocacy in 1877, writing to President Rutherford B. Hayes and other officials. She argued that the Red Cross would not just help in wartime but could also provide disaster relief during peacetime. Floods, fires, hurricanes, and other natural disasters. This argument began to win support. In 1881, Clara Barton founded the American Association of the Red Cross in Washington, D.C. She was elected its first president, a position she would hold for the next 23 years. On March 1, 1882, the United States Senate ratified the Geneva Convention and America officially joined the International Red Cross movement. It had taken Clara Barton over a decade of persistent advocacy to achieve this goal. Clara Barton immediately put the American Red Cross to work. In May 1881, even before official recognition, the Red Cross provided relief to victims of forest fires in Michigan. In 1882, the Red Cross aided victims of Mississippi River floods. In 1884, they helped after a devastating Ohio River flood. Clara Barton personally led many of these relief efforts. She traveled to disaster sites, organized volunteers, distributed supplies, and raised funds. She was in her 60s but still had the energy and determination of a much younger woman. The American Red Cross, under Barton's leadership, pioneered the concept of disaster relief. It was an expansion of the original Red Cross mission, which had focused only on wartime relief. Barton's innovation became known as the American Amendment to the Red Cross mission. In 1889, the Johnstown flood killed over 2,000 people in Pennsylvania. It was one of the worst disasters in American history. Clara Barton arrived with Red Cross volunteers. Within days, she established a headquarters and organized a massive relief operation. The Red Cross provided food, shelter, clothing, and medical care to survivors. They built temporary housing and helped people rebuild their lives. Barton stayed in Johnstown for 5 months, overseeing every aspect of the relief work. The success of the Red Cross response to the Johnstown flood brought the organization national recognition. Donations poured in, membership grew. Clara Barton became a household name, a symbol of compassion and effective humanitarian action. In 1892, Barton led a Red Cross mission to Russia where famine was killing thousands. She was 70 years old but still willing to travel halfway around the world to help people in need. The Russian relief mission was a great success and brought international Prestige to the American Red Cross. In 1896, Clara Barton led Red Cross relief efforts during the Armenian massacres in Turkey. She witnessed terrible atrocities and worked tirelessly to help the survivors. Barton's courage in traveling to such a dangerous place at age 74 inspired people around the world. In 1898, when the Spanish-American War broke out, Clara Barton returned to her original calling, nursing wounded soldiers. She traveled to Cuba with Red Cross volunteers and established hospitals and relief stations. Barton worked in Santiago and other Cuban cities providing medical care to American soldiers and Cuban civilians alike. She was 76 years old, working in tropical heat and disease-ridden conditions, but Clara Barton never complained, never slowed down. She had the same determination and courage she had shown on Civil War battlefields over 30 years earlier. However, Barton's leadership of the Red Cross was becoming controversial. Some board members and donors questioned her management style. They wanted more formal accounting procedures and organizational structure. Clara Barton had always run the Red Cross in a very personal, hands-on way. She made decisions quickly, often without consulting the board. She kept informal financial records and sometimes mixed her personal funds with Red Cross money. Critics accused her of being autocratic and disorganized. Supporters defended her as a visionary leader who got results. The controversy grew throughout the early 1900s. In 1904, there was a movement to reorganize the Red Cross and remove Clara Barton from leadership. Barton fought back, but she was 82 years old and tired of the political battles. On May 14, 1904, Clara Barton resigned as president of the American Red Cross, the organization she had founded and led for 23 years. She was hurt and angry about being forced out, feeling that her life's work was being taken from her. Clara Barton retired to her home in Glen Echo, Maryland, a house she had purchased in 1891. She spent her remaining years writing her memoirs and reflecting on her long life of service. Barton wrote about her Civil War experiences, her work establishing the Red Cross, and her many relief missions. She wanted to ensure that her story would be remembered and would inspire future generations. Clara Barton remained active in her community even in her 80s. She gave lectures, supported women's suffrage, and advocated for civil rights. She was a progressive thinker who believed in equality and justice for all people. Barton never married and had no children, but she had countless friends and admirers, people who had been touched by her compassion and inspired by her courage. On April 12, 1912, Clara Barton died of pneumonia at her home in Glen Echo. She was 90 years old. She had lived through the entire span of the 19th century and into the 20th, witnessing incredible changes in American society. Clara Barton's funeral was held at the Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of people attended, including government officials, Red Cross workers, and ordinary citizens whose lives she had touched. Barton was buried in the family plot in North Oxford, Massachusetts, the town where she was born, on Christmas Day 90 years earlier. Clara Barton's legacy lived on through the American Red Cross. The organization she founded grew into one of the most important humanitarian organizations in the world, providing disaster relief, blood donation services, support for military families, and emergency assistance. The Red Cross has helped millions of people in America and around the world, responding to earthquakes, hurricanes, wars, and countless other crises. Clara Barton pioneered the profession of nursing in America. She showed that women could work in dangerous conditions, could lead large organizations, could make a difference in the world through courage and compassion. Barton broke down barriers for women in the workplace and in public life. She proved that women were just as capable as men of leadership and heroism. Clara Barton was, even in death, the angel of the battlefield, the woman who had devoted her life to relieving suffering and helping others in their darkest hours. Her example continues to inspire humanitarian workers, nurses, and volunteers who follow in her footsteps, serving others with courage, compassion, and dedication.